August 8, 2026. United Center, Chicago. Barely 3 minutes gone in the first quarter. Sophie Cunningham reads the passing lane, steps in front of it, and takes off. Open floor. Nobody between her and the rim. The kind of break that ends in 2 points 9 times out of 10. Then DiJonai Carrington comes from behind. Full sprint, arms pumping, trying to close a gap that shouldn't be closable. As Cunningham rises for the layup, Carrington's arm sweeps across, high, catching her at the head and neck. Cunningham's feet leave the floor at the wrong angle. She comes down hard. Somehow, the ball still drops. The whistle. The review. A flagrant 1 becomes a flagrant 2 before the quarter is even over, and Carrington is walking to the locker room. That much, everybody's seen. It's been clipped, replayed, argued over 1,000 times by now. What happened in the 8 minutes after? That's the part most of the takes never slow down long enough to actually look at. So that's where we're going to spend our time tonight. Not the 15-second version. The whole night. What was said, who said it, and what actually holds up once the noise dies down. Every incident like this has a room it happens in, and the room matters. The Indiana Fever had spent the whole season as the most watched team in the league. Every game an event, every possession under a magnifying glass most franchises never have to live under. That kind of light doesn't just find the stars. It finds every hard screen, every no-call, every shove after the whistle, and it holds onto them longer than it used to. Sophie Cunningham had become one of the players that light found most often. Not just for her game, though there was plenty there to talk about. She plays with an edge, always has, never backed off a physical possession in her life. Off the court, she talks the same way she plays. Direct. Unfiltered. We'll get to why that matters a lot more than usual tonight, because there's a piece of this story that has nothing to do with basketball at all, and we're not going to skip past it. Across the floor, the Chicago Sky were living a different season entirely, scrapping for a playoff spot that kept slipping further away. DiJonai Carrington had barely been part of it. 5 games into her season, still working her way back from a foot injury that had kept her out for months. In the few minutes she'd played before the foul, she'd actually been the best thing happening for Chicago that night. 8 points in 4 minutes off the bench, the kind of spark a losing team hangs onto. Carrington's reputation precedes her in a specific way too, and it's worth naming plainly instead of tiptoeing around it. She defends like there's no such thing as a lost cause. Contests everything. Some people call that relentless. Some call it reckless. Both readings existed before this game ever tipped off, and both were about to get a lot louder. That's the room. A team used to living under the lights, a team fighting to stay relevant, and a player just finding her legs again after months on the sideline. None of it explains what happened next. But it's the air everyone was breathing when it did. 3 minutes in. Score still single digits. Cunningham jumps a passing lane and gone. Nothing but hardwood between her and the rim. Carrington doesn't concede it. She never does. She sprints the length of the floor, chasing a play she has almost no real chance of stopping, and as Cunningham goes up for the layup, Carrington's left arm comes across. Not a strip attempt at the ball. A swipe that lands high. Face, neck, the kind of place contact isn't supposed to land in a basketball game. Cunningham twists in the air. There's no time to brace. She lands hard on her back while the shot, absurdly, still falls through the net. The whistle cuts through the building immediately. The officials head to the monitor. That's protocol any time a flagrant call involves contact this far from the ball, this high on the body. And this is where the story actually starts, if you're being honest about it, because almost everything that gets argued about later traces back to this one review. A flagrant 1 is unnecessary contact. More than the game calls for, but without the officiating crew reading intent to injure into it. A flagrant 2 is a different animal. Unnecessary and excessive, the kind that ends a player's night on the spot. The crew looks at where the contact landed, how much force was behind it, whether the defender was playing the ball or playing something else entirely. On the floor, in real time, it was called a flagrant 1. After the review, after watching the wind-up, the placement, the follow-through, frame by frame, the crew upgraded it. Flagrant 2. Ejection. Sit with that for a second because it matters more than it usually gets credit for. The contact was dangerous enough that trained officials, watching it slowed down from multiple angles, decided it crossed a real line. That part, honestly, isn't in serious dispute. Even people who'd go on to defend Carrington mostly agreed the ejection itself was the right call once you saw it in slow motion. What never got settled, what's still not settled, is a much harder question. Was it intentional? And that's not something a camera can answer. Intent doesn't live on a monitor. It lives somewhere a replay can't reach. Keep that distinction in your back pocket. It's going to come up again and again tonight. With Carrington, with her own former coach, with Cunningham's coach, with Cunningham herself. Almost everyone involved ends up landing in a slightly different place on it, and that's not a contradiction. It's just what split-second contact does to people trying to make sense of it after the fact. Cunningham was up fast. Angry, you'd be angry too, getting caught across the head and neck on a fast break you'd already won. She got in Carrington's space before teammates and staff pulled the two apart. No technical came down on Cunningham for it, a small detail that would end up mattering more later than it seemed to in the moment. Carrington walked toward the tunnel. Somewhere in the building, sections of the Chicago crowd cheered as she left. Fans applauding an ejection for a dangerous foul, which is its own strange, uncomfortable thing to sit with, easy to forget once the story moved on to louder headlines but very real in that building at that moment. The game kept going. Indiana, carrying whatever adrenaline and tension that sequence had left behind, found a way to close it out on the road. Final. 90-86. Fever. If the story stopped there, this is a one-day headline. A hard foul, a review, an ejection, a final score. Everybody moves on to the next night's slate. It didn't stop there. Because about 8 minutes after Carrington disappeared down that tunnel, she had her phone out. 2 words, all caps, on Threads. White privilege. Tagged directly at the Indiana Fever's account. A second post followed close behind. Just a date, August 23rd, the next time these two teams would share a floor, with a smiling emoji sitting next to it like a wink. That combination is what turned a basketball story into something much bigger, almost instantly. Cunningham is white. Carrington is black. The officiating crew that made the call works in a league that's majority black. Read one way, the post looked like an accusation that the upgrade to flagrant 2, the ejection itself, was somehow shaped by racial bias in Cunningham's favor. That's a heavy charge to level at a crew of officials in the raw seconds after getting tossed from a game, and it's the reading that most of the internet ran with in the first hour. But it's not the only reading, and here's where the story gets harder to flatten into a headline. When Carrington was finally asked to explain herself, days later, she pushed back on that exact interpretation. She said she'd never claimed the foul call itself was white privilege. That was, in her words, an assumption other people had made about what she meant. Fair enough to raise. Also fair to point out, she never offered a clean alternative explanation for what she did mean, posted in the heat of the moment, tagged straight at the team of the player she just fouled. That gap, no clarity, then no clarity even after the clarification, is a big part of why the post kept generating fights instead of settling anything. 2 words with no context get read a dozen different ways by a dozen different rooms, and that's more or less exactly what happened. The second post is simpler to sit with. A date. A smile. Posted minutes after an ejection, aimed at a team she'd see again in 2 weeks. Most people read that as some blend of defiance and promise. This isn't over. Carrington never walked that one back the way she tried to walk back the first. Whatever she meant by it, it's hanging over August 23rd now, whether she wanted it to or not. Within the hour, the game itself had become a footnote. Clips of the foul got stitched to screenshots of the post. Players, former players, commentators, millions of strangers with strong opinions. All of it landed inside a single afternoon. Some people saw only the danger of the contact. Some saw only the accusation in the post. Most people, if they're honest, felt something about both at once, in whatever order their timeline happened to serve it to them. After the final buzzer, reporters asked Cunningham about both things, the foul and the post, and she didn't dodge either one. On the second question, her answer was short and firm. This has nothing to do with race. She offered her own theory for the foul, and it wasn't a racial one. She pointed back a season, to an incident where Carrington, playing for a different team at the time, was involved in a hard, widely discussed hit on another player, J.C. Sheldon. Cunningham floated the idea that what happened to her might have been something like a receipt for how that earlier situation had played out and been covered. Worth being precise about what that is. A theory from one competitor about another competitor's state of mind in a fraction of a second. Not something anyone can actually confirm from outside two people's heads. She was self-aware about her own history, too. Brought it up herself, unprompted. A previous season, a similar play, her own ejection, and her own acknowledgement that it was the right call at the time. Her point wasn't that these plays don't happen. It was that they do, regularly, in a physical league, and that dangerous contact gets a dangerous contact response regardless of who's on either end of it. Race, in her view, had no business being part of the explanation. There's a wider current running underneath all of this, and it's the reason the reaction to this one foul got as loud as it did. Cunningham has spent the past several weeks as one of the more visible active players speaking out against transgender women's inclusion in women's sports, a stance that's made her a genuine flashpoint, drawing real support from some corners and real backlash from others. That's a separate, deeply contested national conversation, one this documentary isn't going to try to settle for you. But it's not separate from this story. It's the reason a chunk of the people who piled on within hours of the foul were, in a real sense, already arguing about something else entirely before Carrington's arm ever crossed Cunningham's neck. She didn't talk that night. 2 full days of silence, through the firestorm, through the takes, through a follower count that reportedly climbed the whole time she said nothing. When she finally sat down with reporters, ahead of Chicago's next game, what she said was fuller and more complicated than the 15-second version of the story ever had room for. On the foul. Not intentional. Just the way she plays, in her telling. A defender who isn't built to let an open layup happen without a fight, whatever the risk. She was honest that she was still finding her rhythm after the foot injury, that her timing might not have been all the way back. But she was just as clear that this is a play she's made across her whole career, and she wasn't promising it wouldn't happen again. Not defiance. More an honest description of who she is on the floor. On the post, as already laid out, she disputed the reading that she was accusing the officials of racial bias. What she was clearer about, sitting in front of reporters, was a broader frustration. She wants the league consistent. Same standard for every foul, every reaction, every player, regardless of the name on the jersey. She pointed specifically at the no call on Cunningham's shove after the play as an example of what she means. And she said she's raised these concerns directly with the league office, not just online, but through actual conversations, and that those conversations, so far, hadn't left her encouraged. That's a genuinely different story than player calls the officiating racist. It's closer to a player frustrated with what she sees as uneven enforcement, who chose an extremely loaded, unexplained way to first air that frustration in the rawest possible moment. Both halves of that are fair to criticize on their own terms. The substance of a consistency argument is worth real debate, and leading with 2 unexplained words instead of a clear statement is worth criticism too. They're different criticisms, though. And a lot of the loudest reactions in that first day only ever engaged with one of them. The 2 coaches closest to it didn't fully agree either, and that's worth sitting with. Stephanie White had coached Carrington earlier in her career, which gave her a vantage point nobody else in this story had. Her read, hard foul, yes. Intentional shot at the neck, she didn't believe so. The right call by the officials, she said plainly, regardless. That's a coach doing something a lot of people watching at home never quite managed that night. Holding intent and consequence as 2 separate things at once. You can believe a player didn't mean to hurt someone and still believe the play demanded serious discipline. White modeled that split about as cleanly as anyone did. Tyler Marsh, on the Chicago side, saw it differently in real time. Live, in the moment, his read was that Carrington was making a play on the ball, not a flagrant 2. He was more cautious than White about the replay, saying he hadn't sat with it closely enough yet to give a final word. 2 coaches. 2 honest, differing reads. If people who watch the sport for a living can't fully agree on what they saw, that tells you something about how genuinely unsettled this one piece of the story still is. We flagged it earlier. Now it's time to actually walk through it, because none of the heat around this story makes sense without it. In the weeks before this game, Cunningham had become one of the more visible active professional athletes speaking out against transgender women's participation in women's sports, A real, contested, sincerely argued national debate, with people on every side who believe what they believe for reasons that matter to them. Questions of fairness. Questions of inclusion. Questions about where a governing body draws its lines. This documentary isn't going to tell you who's right. That's not what tonight is for. What matters here is what that stance did to the temperature around Cunningham before this game ever tipped off. People who agreed with her had already cast her as someone willing to say the unpopular thing out loud. People who disagreed had already cast her, in some cases, as someone whose comments caused real harm. Both audiences were watching her closely for reasons that had nothing to do with a fast break in the first quarter. So when the foul happened, and the post followed 8 minutes later, it landed in a room already at a rolling boil. People sympathetic to Cunningham's politics were quicker to see the post as unfair, or opportunistic, or a deflection from a dangerous play. People critical of her politics were, in some cases, quicker to extend Carrington the benefit of the doubt, or to see the backlash aimed at her as disproportionate. None of that is a knock on anyone for feeling what they felt. It's just an honest account of how a completely separate fight ended up bending the way two very different audiences watched the exact same replay. And it's not unique to this one incident, either. Anytime an athlete becomes a symbol in a bigger political argument, everything that happens to them afterward risks getting pulled into that same current, whether they want it to or not, whether it has any real connection to the original issue or not. That's true no matter which side of the debate you're standing on. This is just an unusually clean example of it happening in real time, in front of everyone. One more thread worth pulling, because it complicates any version of this story that sorts everybody into two tidy sides. The reaction inside the WNBA community itself wasn't uniform. Former player and league veteran Angel McCautry took a notably skeptical view of how Carrington handled the aftermath. Not the foul, the response to it. She noted the follower Spike Carrington's account had seen in the days since and asked, more or less, whether some of the ongoing back and forth was serving a purpose beyond just addressing what happened. Is this a way to get attention? That's close to how she put it. An uncomfortable question, and one coming from inside the very community that a lot of the online defense of Carrington had assumed was standing uniformly behind her. It doesn't resolve anything. It's just a reminder that the loudest, simplest version of a story, everyone on this side agrees, everyone on that side agrees, is almost always wrong in the details. This one had real disagreement running in every direction, including among people who share a team, a league, and in some cases a lived background with the two players at the center of it. Take the noise away for a minute. The league is still left holding some genuinely concrete questions, and they deserve to be named plainly instead of buried under takes. Was the in-game discipline enough on its own? A flagrant 2 and an ejection are serious consequences in real time, but leagues also have the option to go back afterward and add fines or suspensions if a play warrants more once it's been reviewed further. That separate process is where a lot of the "did they take this seriously enough" argument actually lives. What about the post itself? Leagues generally have some room to address conduct that generates this much public controversy, independent of anything that happened on the floor. Whether an unexplained white privilege post clears that bar is a genuinely debatable call, and it wouldn't be shocking if people inside the league office land on different sides of it themselves. And then there's the question Carrington raised directly. Is officiating and discipline actually consistent, night to night, player to player? That's not a new complaint in professional sports. Somebody on some team is making a version of this argument in every league, every season. It's also genuinely hard to evaluate from one incident, no matter how loud that one incident gets. But it's not an unreasonable thing to ask a league to look at, and the fact that she says she raised it through actual conversations with the league office, not only through a two-word post, is worth treating as its own separate fact, apart from how the post itself landed. There's a business layer sitting under all of it, too. The WNBA has spent the last couple of seasons riding a real mainstream surge in attention. More cameras, more scrutiny, more of exactly this kind of moment getting magnified past anything it would have drawn a decade ago. That growth is good for the league's future. It also means the room for error in how moments like this get handled, publicly and internally, keeps getting smaller. As of right now, the rematch hasn't happened. Fever and Sky, August 23rd. The exact date Carrington posted, smiling emoji included, minutes after walking off the floor. Nobody knows how it goes. Maybe it's just basketball. Two competitive teams playing a normal game, both sides determined not to let this become bigger than it already is. Maybe the building feels different from any other night either team plays this year, whether anyone involved wants that or not. What we do know is that every camera in that arena is going to be pointed a little closer at both of these players than usual, and every 50-50 call that touches either of them is going to get replayed and picked apart within minutes. That's what the league, both teams, and both players are walking into. It's a real test of everything we've talked about tonight. Whether the league can hold its own standard steady under pressure, and whether two competitors who've been through this together can just go out and play the game in front of them. So where does that leave it? A dangerous foul, reviewed and upgraded correctly, by nearly every account, coaches included. A post that meant something different depending on who you asked, including, by her own later account, something different than what most people assumed in the first hour. A player with a real, previously stated grievance about consistency, who chose an ambiguous and inflammatory way to say it out loud for the first time. A political fight involving one of the players that had nothing to do with basketball, and everything to do with how ready an entire online audience was to take a side before the ball was even inbound. And a league still learning, in real time, how to handle moments like this in the middle of the biggest growth stretch it's ever had. None of that fits in 15 seconds. It might not fully fit in 75 minutes, either. But it's a lot closer to what actually happened than any single villain version of this story that's been making the rounds. August 23rd is a week away. We'll be back once it's happened. What do you think deserves the closest look here? The foul, the post, the league's consistency, or something else entirely? Tell us in the comments.